Hello everybody! I hope everybody's been doing well and has had a good week thus far. Ooh, sorry, I'm a little bit nervous, but I think as we get into it, I always get into the flow of everything. But hope everybody is doing well, just getting set up for this. Hello, hello, hello! So the first thing, I just want to do a bit of housekeeping first thing. I have alerts off, but I do have chat up. I can see chat, but I'll be focusing on the presentation for now. But if you need immediate clarification on a point, I'll do my best. I'll always have my eyes on things, and I will timestamp this stream afterwards so we can jump to whatever section you'd like, and of course I can answer any other questions in the comments later. So I'll probably have my avatar here turned off for the majority of this presentation. I just have it on now. I just want to make sure I don't end up covering anything important, because I do end up using, you can see I'm covering the title here a little bit. And I wanted to just give a huge thank you to beannibun.bsky for the amazing thumbnail. I apologize for covering it up here a little bit, but I'm so thrilled to finally be able to show this off. And we're sort of going into it being sort of, I didn't know what kind of imagery I wanted to express going into like Canto 9, for instance, but I had a few ideas like the Kokeshi dolls, obviously the spider thread, the Rashomon, and she just made this amazing composition. So I hope everybody can also enjoy this incredible art, and I'm so thrilled, and I want to do my best to live up to it. So what is this presentation going to be about? So if you've seen my Dream of the Red Chamber stream, it's not going to be like that. That was sort of just like an overview of characters and meant to sort of be an introduction without like spoiling plot points of Dream of the Red Chamber. What we're going to do here is we're going to do a brief look at some history, and then we're going to summarize 6 of Akutagawa's short stories and do some analysis. Some of these stories you may have heard of, some you may have not. Then we're going to try and find some overarching themes and connect them together. And then the final story we're going to look at is Hell's Screen, and I hope with this new context we can draw some new conclusions. Now, Akutagawa's career lasted 13 years, over the course of which he published something like 150 short stories, and I've only read a fraction of those, and this presentation is only going to be covering a fraction of that. So this is not going to be a comprehensive look at Akutagawa's works. His work was varied and covered diverse themes, which we're just not going to be able to cover everything here. A proper overview would do things like look at his views on the I novel and its roles in Japanese literary history, for instance, but there are plenty of resources to learn more about some of these things. And while this presentation isn't about Limbus Company, it was done in the context of Canto 9, so I was trying to focus on themes we know about, like family and art. That being said, this isn't meant to serve as predictive content, and there's always a certain amount of subjectiveness to analysis. I do not wish this to be taken as an authoritative overview of Akutagawa's works. I just read some books and papers and wanted to share what I've learned. So as we get into it, there'll be theme slides, which have sort of a red title, and I've also highlighted some lines throughout this presentation. These are meant to be either like important lines or connected themes, but there aren't really hard rules with what I highlighted, just what felt right in the moment. Oh, and I also have like a little intermission scheduled so I can refill my water bottle, but we'll see how things go. And also content warning. If you've read Hell's Screen, or I guess in general are familiar with Limbus, you're probably aware of the kind of themes that Akutagawa often included in his work. But murder, mental illness, assault, and suicide will all be mentioned in this presentation. I'm gonna hide me here, and let us begin. So I wanted to start with this quote. "This life is more hellish than hell itself. The sufferings of hell are always regulated by one principle. For instance, when you, being hungry, try to eat food, A fire burns between you and the meal, preventing you from eating it. However, the sufferings in life are unfortunately not that simple. You try to eat the food in front of you. A fire may burn sometimes and you cannot eat it, but sometimes you can grab it and eat it easily. Not everybody finds it so easy to adjust to such irregularity in life. This is from his work Shūi no Kotoba. And I found when you look up Akutagawa, the quote, "life is more hellish than hell itself," sort of comes up a lot. Well, if you look him up and you go past the Bungo Stray Dog stuff, this first part of the quote often pops up. But I wanted to include the whole thing, and we're going to... I mean, clearly it's very evocative and sort of sets the tone for what we'll be getting into. But I wanted to put the whole thing here so we have the rest of the context, and we're gonna come back to this in a little bit. I also wanted to show off some of the sources that I used. These are the main books that I read. So like I said, Akutagawa, he wrote something like 150 short stories. I'm not entirely sure if everything is even translated into English. Sometimes I was searching for a certain story and I just couldn't find it, or other times I'd find like portions of it translated on people's blogs. Like really, I found some stuff that was just like some people are using it for like Japanese practice on like a Tumblr blog kind of thing. So these were the main sources I used for his works. The main one I used is the one on the left, Rashomon and 17 Other Stories. This is the Penguin Books version. And then the other two were sort of used to like fill in the gaps. Because there's actually quite, when you're looking at like publications, there tends to be quite a lot of overlap between all the books. There are certain stories that are just more popular, more commonly translated than others. I don't know how well you can see it on the right one, but you can see it's titled like Rashomon, Hellscreen, Cogwheels, A Fool's Life, and Other Short Fiction. And those are the stories that get translated over and over again. But I found all of them good. The Penguin Books version had like a very comprehensive like notes, forwards and backwards, and I do think when I was looking it up, it does seem to be like the most easily accessible version in English. So I definitely recommend it, but I didn't find none of the translations felt bad or anything, even comparing them. And also about the one on the right, you probably can't see, but forward by Boaz. And now I want to also bring up some of the papers I read. So all references are in the description, references and some resources. I bring up these three papers in particularly because they were the most important works that helped me understand Akutagawa's world, life, and stories. This presentation owes a lot to these papers in particular. I quote Tsuruda directly several times because he puts things so much more eloquently than I can. He has a wonderful way with words. He has some extra papers that I don't have, but if you're looking for somebody that really wrote a lot about him, it's definitely Tsuruda. And the one on the middle, Ryūnosuke's Concepts in Life and Art, that one's like a over 200-page dissertation. It's amazing, honestly. And I also wanted to highlight Tsuruda in particular because he translated the material for his dissertation himself. That gave me access to some materials I wouldn't have access to otherwise. But also, he cites a Japanese collection of Akutagawa's writings, but not always the content they came from, just like a page and a volume number. So sometimes I have quotes here in the presentation that don't have direct attributions, and that's why I don't know exactly where they're from. I might have a bit of context, but for everything else I try and put the story, or at least the character's name, if the story's obvious. And if I just take a break here, I'm just drinking. If I take some awkward pauses. Let's get into it. Ryūnosuke Akutagawa. So, who was he? Akutagawa is considered a Taisho-era writer, and I think that requires a little bit of historical context. But to talk about the Taisho era, we need to understand how we got there, meaning, let's explore the end of the Meiji era. And to get into that, we need to go even further back. And now, history is not something I find you can really reduce to a handful of bullet points, particularly this area in time. So this is a very, very simplified version of a very rapidly changing period in Japan's history. So starting in the 17th century, Japan had a policy of isolation called sakoku that was put in place by the Tokugawa shogunate, the government, in 1603. Now, so you might have heard of like Japan's policy of isolation, period of isolation, but it wasn't entirely isolated. There was some trade, for instance, trade with China, Korea, and the Netherlands were allowed at certain points. But then in 1853, Admiral Matthew C. Perry arrived in Edo Bay and on behalf of the US ordered Japan to open their borders and basically gave them an ultimatum. Open up or we'll come back with a lot of guns. The next year, Perry would return to Japan and would sign the Convention of Kanagawa, which was a not exactly equal treaty between the US and Japan, ending this policy of isolation. But not everybody in Japan was happy with this treaty, and this led to a period of civil unrest and political violence, which eventually resulted in the overthrowing of the Tokugawa shogunate and the return of power to the emperor, Emperor Meiji, beginning the Meiji era. So this was the Meiji Restoration. And this was this really rapid period of modernization, industrialization, modernization, westernization. So the term that came up researching this was Bunmei Kaika, civilization and enlightenment. And when I say rapid, it was really rapid. The first railway was opened only 4 years after the Meiji Restoration. And then the next years were spent reforming the country, moving the capital from Kyoto to Tokyo, abolishing of feudalism and a samurai class, the creation of a constitution based on the British and German constitution. Everything was changing. Clothes, hairs, everything. And I have here in the corner, there's actually a whole art form sort of dedicated to this modernization called kaikae. So it's a whole genre of woodblock print celebrating westernization. So trains were a very common theme, but if you look it up, you can see like just sort of like industrialization, just people hanging out, walking around in modern clothes. I think there's also one called like Yokohama-e, because Yokohama was one of the places that was sort of like the hub of a lot of this. But with all this, we also had not the beginnings, but Japan starts to get into wars, and we're now in the Empire of Japan, so colonization is starting to occur. They put down the First Sino-Japanese War, just meant to represent that sort of war section. But there's quite a few things going on. If you look at the Taisho, you can see that obviously World War I is going on during this time. But a lot was changing for Japan, and one thing that modernized was the military. As instructed, they brought over like Western military structures, Western weapons. And then as we move into the Taisho era, if the term before was Bunmei Kaika, now it seems to be something more like Taisho democracy, which was this whole period of increased liberalism. I just wanted to sort of reiterate, this is the world that Akutagawa was growing up and writing in. This is what his parents experienced. This is what he was growing up, and it's sort of hard for me to fully comprehend just how much Japan changed in this period. I mean, look at the Meiji Restoration, 1868. In only 100 years, it's 1968. We're almost the 70s in Japan. I just can't quite. It boggles my mind a little bit to imagine going from like feudalism to the 70s in that short a period of time. So yeah, that's the main thing. And now let's talk about Akutagawa himself. So he lived 1892 to 1927. So just catching like the end of Meiji, lived throughout the Taisho. I've read some writers that like to actually say like the Taisho era ended with him in some respects. I think that mostly refers to writing. It's a bit of a poetic way of putting it. But at a very young age, I think before he's even a year old, only a few months, he was abandoned by his mother, Fuku. Now, I tried to do some more research, because a lot of what is written about this comes from his perspective. So the reason he gives is basically because she was a mad woman. And I really tried to see what other language is used, trying to figure out what was actually happening there. I think the only thing that elaborated on that was Wikipedia, which didn't have a source, but if you hover over the mental illness part of this story, it brings you to postpartum depression, but nothing is really elaborated on. But I'm just going to use the words he would use, even if they're not really the words that I would. Then he was adopted by his maternal uncle's family, so that's why he has the Akutagawa name. His adopted mother was named Tomo, and his aunt, Fuki, so Fuku's sister, also helped raise him and was an important part of his life, and we're going to come back to them fairly quickly. So he studied English literature in university. He thesised on William Morris, but he was incredibly well-read. I put down water margin here because it gets a whole section dedicated to it in one of his autobiographical works. But he brings up Dostoevsky quite a bit, Crime and Punishment in particular. But people get name dropped all the time. Tolstoy, Voltaire, Baudelaire, Poe. So many people I'm not even familiar with. And he spoke English, knowing that. He knew how to read stuff in the original language, but he read, not just Western sources, but I put water margin there, but I've seen in papers references to all the Chinese greats. The Red Chamber, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Journey to the West, obviously, as well as lots of Japanese sources, and he was well read in his contemporaries. He called Natsume Soseki his master. So he started publishing his works from 1914 onwards, and then he spent a little break, 4 months working as a reporter in China in 1921. I wanted to see it, but I couldn't find out how to see it, but there's a film there's a TV movie about that period that I want to find sometime. It seemed like the reason why that ended was because of mental illness, and he died by suicide in 1927. And some of his works were published posthumously. He left some things behind, up to his friends, whether they felt it was appropriate to be published, and I think we have all of these now. So let's talk about family. So I started with 2 quotes here that I think really just set the stage and won't honestly just summarize anything, which is, the first act of the life strategy begins the moment we form a parent-child relationship. And then the second quote where he says, family system is hell. Every member of a family sacrifices oneself more or less for the family. And that second quote was directly in English. Sometimes he wrote down his thoughts in English, and one of the papers I read pointed out he tended to speak a little more freely when writing stuff down in English. And I particularly like the reference to system here. I feel like it's so artificial and unfriendly, the way to refer to family. And sort of how I framed the rest of things going forward. Everything is just systematic. But his attitude towards family was heavily influenced by his experiences with his own maternal figures. So first we have Fuku, his birth mother, and he was very afraid that her condition, her madness, was hereditary, and that she planted this seed of madness in him that one day, without warning, would sprout, and everything around him would just collapse. And he was scared of passing that on. But there's also this really clear sense of abandonment in his writing. In one of his autobiographical works, The Early Life of Daidoji Shinsuke, that you'll see with some of his autobiographical stuff, he will use a different name for himself, even though it's clearly his perspective. There's a whole section in it about him feeling isolated and alienated because he wasn't breastfed growing up. But there's this really clear feeling that this is what made him the other. It is his mother's fault that he is like this, that he is not like his peers, that he sticks out in some way, that he is weaker. I found it really, really evocative, that specific part. This all led to this like feeling of isolation, alienation from his peers. He did not like being known as the son of the mad woman, for instance. And then there's Tomo, his adopted mother. I got less of a sense of who Tomo was as a person from his writing. There's both positive and negative anecdotes, but it's in a really normal sort of family sense. But he clearly loved her and considered her his real family. One of his stories has his biological father wanting him to go back and live with him, but he rejects, and he just talks about how much he loves his family, and particularly his aunt, who we'll get to in just a second. Still, she represents the sort of financial responsibility that Akutagawa, the eldest son, had to bear. He was expected not only to support his wife and children, but also his parents and siblings' families. In some of his autobiographical writings, there's a real sense of discomfort in his own home. Everything just about family, about being around family, about being in his own home, just applied this pressure to him. He could never, like, sit still. Outside would be alienating, but at home wasn't safe either. And then we have Fuki, who's probably one of the people that's written about the most. It's a pretty clear, like, sort of love-hate relationship. We can sum it up with this quote: "It was blank who made my life miserable, but I owe this person more than anyone else in my life." And it was published with a blank, but some of his friends confirmed later that it referred to Fuki. So I have some quotes from one of his stories. This is from Life of a Fool. I have two little, split up into a whole bunch of different sections with a title. And so I'm gonna read two of them. So one is called The House. He was living in the upstairs room of a house in the suburbs. The second story tilted oddly because the ground was unstable. In this room, his aunt would often quarrel with him, though not without occasional interventions from his adoptive parents. Still, he loved this aunt more than anyone. Never married, and by the time he was 20, she was an old woman close to 60. He often wondered, in that suburban second story, if the people who loved each other had to cause each other pain. Even as the thought crossed his mind, he was aware of the floor's eerie tilt. And then we have another one titled Marriage. The day after he married her, he delivered a scolding to his wife. "No sooner do you arrive here than you start wasting our money." But the scolding was less from him than from his aunt, who had ordered him to deliver it. His wife apologized to him, of course, and to the aunt as well, with the potted jonquils she had bought from him in the room. And jonquils, I didn't know what these were. They're kind of daffodil. But there was this real feeling that he felt beholden to her, that even as an adult, she was putting pressure on him, that he did not have a life of his own. He was just, there's another story where he like sees some dummies in a shop window and thinks of himself in that he's just one of those dummies. So in other words, family is a system, an institution that one is bound to without any say by the individual. You have no say who your parents are, you have no say who your family is, and you have to take part in it. You have to. And it's not socially acceptable to reject it. So there's this feeling like he wanted liberation to just pursue his art, but his family just continually put pressure on him. And then it becomes a sort of awful cycle family continues to perpetuate. So I have recommended reading. This is a whole bunch of his more commonly translated autobiographical stuff. There's Cogwheels, also called Haguruma or Spinning Gears, The Really Life of Daidoji Shinsuke, The Life of a Fool, Death Register, all of those. I feel like his real feelings come out most clearly, and this is something you'll see. A lot of his autobiographical work was the stuff that was written in the later years of his life. He sort of becomes more open. You can read a lot about sort of like his development as a writer, but his most open stuff is in the last years. Then our next theme, which I think follows, is madness. As we said, Akutagawa feared the seed of madness planted in him would one day sprout. And it was a real deep fear. Everything about madness scared him. And Cogwheels ends with the narrator wishing that someone would strangle him in his sleep so he didn't have to keep feeling the things that he was feeling. Cogwheels is one of the toughest reads for me because it's really just about just constant anxiety, everything causing anxiety, and there's just like, you can't exist outside, you can't exist even in your home, just everything is just like closing in onto you. And that only a thin border exists between something is something that Akutagawa explores a lot in his stories. A person is always fighting against their inner darkness. How fragile is a person's sense of sanity? How fragile is a person's sense of morality? There's also this concept of the quote-unquote mad genius that comes up occasionally, which is someone whose knowledge or skills alienated them from the world. We'll see this a bit later with Yoshihide. And he sometimes wonders if perhaps being a fool would be easier. And he feels kinship with people he perceived to have this label, or even just having some sort of anxiety. So people, Natsume Soseki, Nietzsche, Van Gogh, Goya. Van Gogh comes up a few times. And this sort of, and I have this quote from Tsuruda here, which I think like summarizes it. Thus, Akutagawa's negative perception of the world is based on his belief that the world lacks rationality. This in turn stems from his equation of his mad mother with the world, that the world is a sick, decaying organism with no law or reason, is a theme Akutagawa repeats in a large number of his stories. So the world, his world, this world, is inherently irrational, but therefore it's up to man to try and impose order and rationality onto it. So if we come back to our quote here, this life is more hellish than hell itself, you can see, we can understand a little bit more what he's saying. Hell makes sense. There is logic to it. He likes logic. But life does not make sense. It's confusing, it's irregular, and it's difficult existing in that world. It's really difficult. And it's alienating when you don't have a place and everything is just closing in and scary. Oh yeah, Cogwheels is translated in Spinning Gears in my copy of the short story, which is really interesting to see the perspective tone difference between the two titles. Yes. I've been calling it Cogwheels because that's what's called in mine. In some ways, I think Spinning Gears, to me, that's related in English, that does evoke the feeling of like, we use like, when you're thinking, your gears are spinning. And I think that, and gears can sometimes just spin and go nowhere. So I do think Spinning Gears is a bit more evocative for me, but I'm just calling it Cogwheels here as we go forward. And as we get into the short stories now, I should add, I put translations for the titles, but obviously between different copies, names are translated differently, so I've tried to include the Japanese title as well. But some get some very, very different titles. I think like, and then some papers that I'd be reading, which made it hard to search up titles, would just use the Japanese title. So I did read some papers which prefer to just call it Haguruma. But let's get into our first short story. So I'm just wondering if anybody has the same experience with Rashomon as I had. Because growing up, I knew that Rashomon was a film by Akira Kurosawa. It's a film my parents liked. I was aware that there was something called the Rashomon effect, and I knew about this Simpsons joke, which is Marge saying, "Come on, Homer, Japan will be fun. You liked Rashomon." And Homer's saying, "That's not how I remember it." So I was coming, and then I learned it's based on the Akutagawa story. So coming into it, I was like, okay, Rashomon is about something to do with people having different memories of an event, or like people having different perspectives on an event. That's where it's coming into Rashomon from. But it's not about that. It's not. So Kurosawa's Rashomon is actually based on 2 short stories. It's the other short story that has the whole memory thing. So it took me by surprise. But what is Rashomon? Everything I know is a lie. Well, it is right that Rashomon, the movie, is about that. So what was Rashomon about? So Rashomon, the main character, is a servant to a samurai who has just lost his job and has nowhere to go. He considers becoming a thief, but the idea repulses him. So he decides to take refuge at the dilapidated Rashomon, which is a city gate in Kyoto that is currently falling apart. There, he finds piles of corpses and a woman plucking hair from them. He is disgusted by this and prepares to attack her. But she begs him to stop, and the woman tells him that these people were evil in life and deserve to have their hair plucked, and she's planning to use these to make wigs. And she's not wrong for doing this, as will allow her to survive. In fact, those people would probably be fine with her taking her hair. But then the servant says, quote, "You won't blame me then for taking your clothes. That's what I have to do to keep from starving to death." So he takes all her clothes and basically just disappears off into the night. So it's a quite short story. So firstly, this story is based on a story from Konjaku Monogatari, which is a book of over 1,000 ancient tales. This is quite common for Akutagawa, to take a story and rewrite it in his own way. We will see this many more times today. And now what was the Rashomon? The Rashomon was a city gate in Kyoto, and did exist. If you look it up right now, I think it's the only remnants of it is a marker and with a plaque in a playground. This is how it appears in Kurosawa's film, broken and falling apart. And you have to remember that, as we learned, the capital was moved from Kyoto to Tokyo after the Meiji Restoration. So this was a place that was very rapidly stripped of its power and importance, which is not unlike the servant's experience. So we commonly understand this story to be about the struggle and eventual decay of human morality. How does morality conflict with the need for survival? Can moral ambiguity even exist? And how thin is that line for morality? What does it take to push someone over the edge? We have the servant here who's initially disgusted by everything about becoming a thief. But just with these words, something changes in him, and it overtakes him. He becomes the thing he was disgusted and hated by. And it was the woman right with her words, for saying that this was all for her survival, and the people are dead anyway. Their justification's all right. And the Rashomon and the protagonist have both been abandoned by civilization. There's a lot of descriptions about how the Rashomon is falling apart, it's destroyed, it's being overtaken by nature, which is corrupting, and it's corrupting the rest of Kyoto as well. Everything is sort of being overtaken, overgrown, and this sort of also represents their alienation from society. The very end of the story says that the servant disappears into the night, never to be seen again. He's fully abandoning civility, society. But is that his fault, or has society already abandoned him? There's also this sort of, if you're interested in getting into more of his short stories, I think this is, not only is this obviously one of his most famous ones, but it's written, if you're interested in analysis, there's a lot of like themes of dehumanization. Characters are pretty constantly described in animalistic terms. There's a section in one of the papers I read that just went over like how a lot of the terms he uses, the kanji has an animal in it, even, which is one of those things that's like sort of hard to translate. I think there was like one of the words was like to yell, but had like an animal kanji, and then that gets translated to like to bark. I found very interesting. And the servant, he has this big pimple, which sort of that he's constantly like picking at or scratching at, and sort of like you can see it as representing something festering within him, some sort of corruption, something evil. Well, let's talk about In a Grove, also sometimes called In a Bamboo Grove, or Yabu no Naka. This is the story that Kurosawa's Rashomon is mostly based on. Rashomon, the short story, sort of provides that, the Rashomon and the framing. And so it's a little difficult to summarize In a Grove due to the nature of the story. It's comprised of 7 testimonies, all detailing the mysterious death of a samurai. And coming to this, I initially approached the story as a mystery. You know, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. But this is a story that resists that. No matter how you try to fit the pieces together, how you try to untangle it, it just doesn't work. The weapons change, the colors of the clothing change. Every detail is contradicted by another. So first of the testimonies is from a woodcutter who found the body of the samurai. The second is a traveling priest who saw the samurai traveling with a woman. The third is a policeman who apprehended a bandit named Tajumaru and is sure that he, Tajumaru, is the murderer. After all, quote, everybody said Tajumaru must have done it. Next we have the woman's mother, who reveals that the samurai's name is Takahiro and he is married to the woman whose name Masago. And next we have Tajumaru's confession, where he openly admits to killing the man. He explains that he saw them traveling and decides that he must have the woman. So he tricks Takahiro into following him into a bamboo grove and ties him up. Then Masago tries to attack him and he disarms and then assaults her. And after that, she straight up says, either you die or my husband dies. It's too shameful otherwise. So Tajumaru and Takahiro have an honest duel to the death. After Tajumaru wins and kills Takahiro, he realizes that the woman is gone. So we have the confession. He's captured. Case closed, right? But the story continues. Next is a confession by Masako. She says that after she was assaulted by Tajumaru, she runs to her husband who is gagged and sees in his eyes just utter contempt for her. All she sees in his gaze, utter contempt. Then she faints. Then she wakes up and Tajumaru is gone. And seeing her husband, who is still tied up, contempt for her again, she finds a dagger on the ground and then says she will end both their lives. She stabs him, killing him, and then faints again. Then she says she tried to end her own life multiple times and failed, and then joins a temple. So that's how the story starts. It's said a woman from the temple. And then finally we have the testimony by Takahiro himself, as told by a spirit medium. He says after being tied up, he tried to tell his wife with his eyes, don't believe him, he's a liar. But he sees in her eyes that she just looks spellbound, and she says to Tajumaru, take me anywhere you like, and then screams at him to kill her husband. Kill him, kill him. But then Tajumaru basically just kicks her back and asks Takahiro if he would like him to either kill her or let her go. Then Masago runs away screaming, and then Tajumaru cuts Takahiro free and runs off. Finally, Takahiro takes Masago's dagger and impales it into his chest. So chat, what do you think? What do you think is the truth behind this story? I want to reiterate that not only do the motivations and the way the story is being told contradict each other, but so do details, the colors the characters wear, the murder weapon, how the deaths happened. Who's the butler? I think I prefer the rainbow fish. I like rainbow fish too. I'm just finishing my tea. There can be more than one truth, exactly. So this is also based on a tale from Konjaku Monogatari. The original has the same basic plot. A man is tied up in a bamboo grove and forced to watch his wife be assaulted by a thief. It is also believed that Akutagawa was inspired by The Moonlight Road by Ambrose Bierce. This story is about a murder and is presented from 3 different perspectives, with the final perspective being the victim's, as told through a medium. So we have 7 contradicting testimonies from 4 witnesses and 3 active sort of participants in the event. But there are 3 constants. Takahiro dies, Tajumaru assaults Masago, and Masago wishes for Takahiro's death. So the main theme that comes out of this is that there is no single universal truth. There is no objective truth, and that the truth is distorted by the individual. Not only are characters trying to portray themselves in a certain way, whether because of ego or self-preservation, but the truth itself is distorted by our biases, our perceptions. And from a storytelling perspective, this can reveal a lot about the characters. What do they want to hide? How do they want to portray themselves? We can also see this as a story that asks for a judgment. It's presented like a mystery after all, but it also demonstrates how the characters make judgments. We see both Takahiro and Masago make judgments on their partners based on their eyes. And who knows what's the truth there. And I have this quote from Tajumaru when he's being sort of... His section is just entire, like, him speaking to the policeman. And he says, "When I kill a man, I do it with my sword, but people like you don't use swords. You gentlemen kill with your power, with your money, and sometimes with just your words. You tell people you're doing them a favor. True, no blood flows, the man is still alive, but you killed them all the same. I don't know whose sin is greater, yours or mine." I like this a lot, particularly the line, sometimes just with your words. It really underscores the importance of language here, how we say things, how we portray them. And then whether Tajumaru's statement is even valid or not. His whole section is like, even though he's a thief and he admits to killing him, he sort of is portraying him as the noble person in this whole story. I want to say like, I recommend all the stories I have in here, but it's definitely, there's a reason why this one is like, I feel like the most, at least in the West, the one that sort of has had the most cultural significance. We do have the thing called the Rashomon effect as well. So we can read this. Are the testimonies unreliable, or are there simply different truths based on a character's own perception of things? This is what we call like the objectivity of truth. Is there an objective truth? So what's one of the things that these stories have in common? That's nature. So you have another quote from Akutagawa here. "We must know that nature is cold to human beings. Nature is cold to man." So nature is a common theme and characteristic of Japanese literature. And really, I think in literature overall, there's always stories about nature. But Japan specifically has this term, mono no aware, sometimes translated as the pathos of things. The appreciation of the impermanence of life, often represented by the transience of nature. But this is not how Akutagawa views nature. To him, it's this hostile force. It's associated with decay, chaos, and a complete indifference to man. It can be beautiful, but it can also be dangerous. In Rashomon, it overtakes the gate and the servant disappears from civilization. In a grove, it's the grove itself where the crimes take place. Nothing happens outside the grove. It's only once characters are within it that everything happens. And as I was reading this, as I was reading his stories, it was one of the concepts I struggled with the most. Because often in literature, returning to nature means returning to a place of refuge. It's a place of healing, away from the like rapidly evolving world. And so often nature is just associated with beauty, with purity. But in Akutagawa's stories, it's this ever-present danger, always threatening to destroy and corrupt. I found it such an upsetting concept, upsetting thought, this like complete lack of safety. Even when you're within your home, outside, it's just like slowly eroding away at things. So now, that's about the halfway point. Now I have a very, very brief intermission, if you'll give me just 1 second to refill my water bottle. I'll be right back. I'm back. It is reminiscent of the more pessimistic end of the Gothic literature. I was also thinking about how the garden, in Dream of the Red Chamber is portrayed, the Daguayuan, where it's so often just this place of beauty. It's like the main location of the story, but then right to the end, it also represents everything decaying, the family decaying, because everyone starts to think it's haunted as everything sort of becomes overgrown. People don't even want to go in there anymore. And I guess speaking of gardens, let's learn about the garden, also called Niwa. So the titular garden is owned by the ancient Nakamura family, who, after the Meiji Restoration, have fallen upon some hard times. And over the course of the story, this is reflected in the overgrowth of their garden. So it's a big household. Now this household has 3 sons. The first is ill-tempered and relinquished his claim as householder, but still lives in the house. But later comes down with tuberculosis and passes away. The second son, who was adopted, runs off with his parents' money with a tavern maid. And the third son is a businessman who has his focus on making money. Now 10 years later, the second son returns to the household. One day, he hears his mother singing a song about a samurai and is suddenly possessed with the idea that he wants to restore the garden. Every day, despite his failing health, he toils away at the garden. His nephew, the first son's son, Renichi, joins in to help, but the second son just becomes more and more agitated and confused, trying to remember the beauty of the garden. Renichi is frustrated by his uncle's actions since he keeps undoing and redoing his progress, planting and unplanting trees, for instance. However, a hint of progress is still made. Quote, "With the coming of autumn, however, the garden could again be distinguished, if only dimly, amidst the mass of weeds and scrub." And with that, with the garden finally being revealed again, the second son passes away contently. In the final section, it is revealed that the house has been torn down and replaced with a railway station, and the Nakamura family is no more. In the final sentences, we learn Renichi, who has become a painter, and sometimes thinks of his uncle, who, despite Renichi's isolation and poverty, encourages him to keep painting. So I think this is one of the clearest examples of a story that describes Akutagawa's approach to nature. His prose is just incredibly vivid in this one. You get both descriptions of the garden in its prime, where he paints this very delicate, no pun intended, this very delicate picture of a big pond and blossoms and beauty, and then the slow decay of the garden, where everything is just mucky and ugly and tangled into itself, and just kind of like eating away, corrupting everything, rotting, even though it should be flourishing. So in this story, there's quite a lot of history to this one, just based on the afterword for it in the book I read, which isn't really obvious to a non-Japanese speaker. There's a lot of references that help situate exactly where the family resides, for instance. But the main interpretation is that this story is about the decline of old Japan. After all, the passing of the Meiji Restoration is directly mentioned, and the 3 sons all sort of represent different attitudes to the decline. We have like the stubborn older son who passes away and is sort of the last of the old order. Then we have the second son, someone who has been alienated from this world, so has to try and carve a place for himself into it. And then the third is someone who tries to take advantage of the situation and make money. He's mostly described as like being away from the family and like trying to get rich quick kind of thing. And if I had to give a main theme, the story is about decay. The garden, rather than flourishing, is described as rotting. The pavilions have fallen down, the waterfalls dried up, the trees no longer bear fruit, and then the family itself decays, with the household of Nakamura literally being no more by the end. But then the family members themselves rot. There's obviously with the people coming down with tuberculosis, also definitely called within it consumption. But they also all have sores. There's some pretty gruesome depictions of like some of the characters needing to wrap up their sores, else the rats would come and like eat them during the night. But this is also a story about trying to find control. Both the second son and Renichi dedicate themselves to finding a form of nature they can control, even if it alienates them from the rest of the world. For the second son, it's literally landscaping the garden, although this proves only vaguely successful. For Renichi, it's becoming a painter, even if that leaves him alone without a family, working himself to death in poverty. At the end, it seems that the same sort of madness that possessed his uncle is also driving him, because he basically sees his uncle's ghost, encouraging him to continue. To help him the same way, for the uncle to like help Renichi the same way Renichi helped the uncle. Yeah, this is a good one. Not super long. I mean, they're all short stories. I would say if you read Hell's Screen, that's the longest of any of the stories that we mentioned here. There's a couple others that I just couldn't find, like, an easy, a book that had an English translation. Some other stuff I wanted to read that came up with papers is something called The Swamp. The Swamp and what's it called? Was that Numachi? And then something called Dreams or Yume. Also about art. Here we have Autumn Mountain, also sometimes called A Picture of an Autumn Mountain or A Painting of an Autumn Mountain, Shūzanzu. And this one, the names in it will vary depending on your translation. I've seen it features characters with Chinese names, so if you remember Dream of the Red Chamber, depending what version you read, the names might be a bit different. But then some translations also use like the Japanese reading of the Chinese name, I believe. This story starts off with a framing conversation between two painters, Yoon Nantian and Wang Shigu. Wang Shigu asks Yoon Nantian if he's ever seen a painting known as Autumn Mountain. Yoon Nantian says he hasn't and asks if Wang Shigu has seen it, to which he replies, quote, "Well, strange to say, I'm not really sure whether or not I have seen it." So Wang Shigu explains that his teacher had once heard about the incredible artistry of this painting and journeys to find it at the house of a Mr. Chang. And it turns out that Mr. Chang's house is old and overgrown with weeds and ivy, but nevertheless, the painting is revealed, and it is the most perfect painting one has ever seen. It is the apex of artistry. All of their paintings pale in comparison. It almost seems not of this world. I'm going to quote the description here. The dominant color was a dark green. From one end to the other, a river ran its twisting course, bridges crossed the rivers at various places, and along its banks were little hamlets. Dominating it all rose the main peak of the mountain range, before which floated peaceful wisps of autumn cloud. The mountain and its neighboring hills were fresh green, as if newly washed by rain, and there was an uncanny beauty in the red leaves of the bushes and thickets scattered along their slope. This was no ordinary painting, but one in which both design and color had reached an apex of perfection. It was a work of artistic instinct with its classical sense of beauty. So the teacher wishes to buy it, but Mr. Chang refuses. 50 years pass, and with Mr. Chang's own passing, the teacher is unsure of the painting's location. Given that this is a story told to Wang Shigu, Yoon Nantian wonders if the painting even exists. However, Wang Shigu continues the story, and he hears that the painting has come into the possession of a nobleman. Wang Shigu and his teacher visit the nobleman, who's having like a garden party to see the painting, and well, it's certainly beautiful and matches the description the teacher gave. Wang Shigu is unsure that this really is the painting his teacher spoke of. Even though art critics verified the authenticity, even Wang Shigu's teacher is unsure if this is the painting he once saw. Regardless, the painting that Wang Shigu's teacher once described is still engraved in their minds. So the story ends with Wang Shigu telling Yoon Nantian, quote, "So even if it never existed, there really is not much cause for regret." Having another drink here. So here's the quote that Mr. Chang says after the teacher views the painting. The fact is that each time I look at this picture, I have a feeling that I'm dreaming. Though my eyes are wide open, I cannot feel that it is I alone who sees its beauty, which is somehow too intense for this world of ours. So similar to In a Grove, this story examines the objectivity of truth, but takes a very different approach using the medium of art. So to describe the objectivity of truth, are there different subjective truths? Here's Simpsons again. So did the painting really exist? Characters even directly question if it exists at all. Or do different paintings exist for each viewer? And then what individual meanings do they take from this painting? Does that impact what they see? They're literally different paintings, and is that valid? And then, like the testimonies in a Grove, do the verbal linguistic descriptions have any impact on one's perception? We have characters who only know the paintings through words, and what do others interpret or take from this form of communication? Does that change how we view these things? And like in a Grove, I don't think there are answers. We wouldn't be discussing the objectivity of truth if there were. I think the point of the final words is that the beauty of the art is real, even if it only exists in the mind. So this is a decidedly more positive take on art, nature, and memories than The Garden. The Garden, which is kind of corruption. Remembering this beauty just like creates corruption. And painting is sort of taking up the role of a painter is sort of seen as a negative. But for what it's worth, The Garden was written later. So what were Akutagawa's attitudes towards art? Firstly, it's important to clarify that when we talk about art here, we don't just mean painting or visual arts. This includes all mediums of art, music, and writing, as that was Akutagawa's means of creation. I have two quotes here again. Life is not worthy of even a line of Baudelaire, and some artists reside in the world of disillusion. Neither do they believe in love nor conscience. Like an ancient ascetic, they live in the desert of nothingness. One may feel sorry for them. Remember that a beautiful mirage appears only in the desert. They are disillusioned by everything in this life, but art creates for them a golden dream. So to Akutagawa, art is superior to life. We see that in the quote above. The life is not worthy of even a line of Baudelaire. This is contrast to a lot of literary trends where the beauty of nature is valued above all else. But here, creation by the hand of man is supreme. The beauty of the Autumn Mountain painting is contrasted by both Mr. Chang's dilapidated house, something that has been effectively returned to nature, and the nobleman's extravagant abode and parties. And life is meaningless without art. Therefore, an artist must create. Wait, I have another quote directly from Tsuruda here. I really like this one. It's so simple, but sort of gets to the heart of all of this. Art does not exist for life, but life for art. Art provides salvation to the artist who is doomed by the cruel, indifferent world. We've seen this theme where characters are alienated from their surroundings, but art provides for them a place of refuge. But why is that? Well, it's partially because art also provides a medium of control not only of nature, but of life itself. Akutagawa actually said mathematics was one of his favorite, if not favorite, subjects. There were formulas to work with and correct answers at the end. There is reason, there is rhythm. And art can provide the same sort of answers. It's controllable, not like the messy and discordant life. We saw how the second son tried to enforce order onto the garden with some success, and then Rinichi followed in his footsteps by becoming a painter. And in the same sort of vein, art is complete, or at least can be completed, unlike life, which is incomplete until death. Oh, R.I.P. Akutagawa, you'd love Godel Shabat. Me too! Incredible book. Side recommendation, Godel Shabat. I should reread that. Now let's look at a story maybe some people are a bit more familiar with. The Spider's Thread. So in The Spider's Thread, the Buddha looks into the depths of hell and notices a criminal named Kandada in the Lake of Blood. Kandada was not only a thief, but also a murderer who had a great many crimes to his name. However, once in life, Kandata decided to spare a spider by not stepping on it, and this was his one act of kindness. And then, in return for his one good deed, the Buddha decides to spare Kandata and lowers a spider of paradise into hell. Kandata notices the thread and sees that it is his chance for salvation and starts to climb up it. He climbs for a long time and then has to take a break. When he looks down below, he sees many other sinners also climbing up after him. Fearing the thread will break, Kandata yells to them below that this spider's thread is mine, get off. And at that very moment, the thread breaks, and all the sinners plunge back into the darkness. So this story actually has two main pieces of inspiration. We have a fable present in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov and The Spider's Web from Karma, A Story of Early Buddhism by Paul Karus. And that's actually what this illustration is from. It's from the page from The Spider's Web. And it has a lot of really beautiful illustrations. They're all on, the whole book is on like archive.org if you'd like to take a look. So the fable or parable that's present in the Brothers, I've seen it sometimes called like the parable of the onion. It features a woman who is in hell. And the woman's guardian angel sort of appeals to God and says that the woman once gave an onion to a beggar. So the guardian angel is allowed to lower this onion into hell, and then the woman grabs onto it, and the onion is what's lifting her out of hell. However, the woman then notices that sinners are also clinging onto her to also get out, and at that point she yells, "Get off, this onion is mine," and then the onion breaks, and the guardian angel weeps. Oh, pretty bang on. Pretty identical. So I've not read The Brothers. I was trying to do a bit of reading about the context of the parable in the story. And it does seem like there's some deeper meaning based on the character telling it, but I don't know enough about the novel to really get into that, to feel comfortable like discussing that. But I did see this one quote that was brought up a few times in conjunction with the onion parable. What is hell? I maintain that it is the suffering of being unable to love. I don't have the full context of it, but it really stuck with me. The perhaps condemnation to hell is less the bad choices you make, but the absence of good ones. And hell itself is being unable to form connections, relationships. And then the spider's web is where the Buddhist framing and the character Kandata comes from, and you can just read it directly on archive.org. It's basically the same story as the spider's thread, with the robber Kandata trying to climb out of hell using the web of his one good deed, sparing of a spider. But then the web snaps when he realizes that others are climbing up. I think the most like salient difference between like the whole plot and the original and the parable of the onion is sort of at the end the Buddha actually directly explains the moral and confirms that the web would have carried all the weight. And funnily enough, the Buddha's words also ask, what is hell? What is hell? It is nothing but egotism, and nirvana is a life of righteousness. I'm really amused that we had like almost the same quote here, but different interpretations. So this was actually published in a children's magazine, and I think it's always useful to consider the audience when analyzing something. We can assume that Akutagawa not only wrote this to be understandable by children, but also had something that he wanted to communicate with the younger generation. And I do think it's fair, because it's for children, it is fair to interpret this pretty straightforwardly about selfishness, about redemption, etc. However, there are some analyses that sort of go in different ways. There's one that was interesting to me where it just sort of talked about that this the sort of area where Kandata is climbing out is sort of like this place of moral ambiguity. It is between heaven and hell. It is between salvation and punishment, really. and how that sort of ties into like Akutagawa's grander feelings of morality. That there can exist a place in between. What does it take to force us from one way to another? Okay. And finally we get to Hellscreen, Jigoku-hen. So Hellscreen is one of the longer short stories I read from Akutagawa. It's divided into multiple sections or chapters if you prefer. I'm gonna summarize it here, but again, it's a summary. It's not including like every detail, but I'm trying to get the important stuff. So Hellscreen is narrated by an unnamed servant. This is important to note for the narrative because, say it with me, it's time for the objectivity of truth again. We are learning things from the narrator's perspective, and the narrator actually mentions that he might not be saying things in quite the right order at certain points. But anyway, this narrator is the servant of the most venerable and magnanimous Lord Horikawa, and after praising his almost godlike deeds, the servant introduces us to the painter Yoshihide, who is as unpleasant as Horikawa is grand. However, Yoshihide does have one weakness, his daughter, whom he cares for deeply. This daughter is a lady-in-waiting for Lord Horikawa's own daughter. I want to reiterate here, the daughter is not named. And there's one more character introduced to our story, and it is a monkey given to Lord Horikawa's son, who names it Saruhide, or Monkeyhide, after Yoshihide, clearly. And the monkey becomes quite close to Yoshihide's daughter after she protects it from the young master's anger. Now, Lord Horikawa shows some special interest in Yoshihide's daughter. Although the narrator tries to sort of gloss over this and later directly denies that Lord Horikawa has any attraction to her. So the narrator brings up a time when, in return for doing a wonderful job on a painting, Lord Horikawa says that Yoshihide can have anything that he wants as a reward, and then Yoshihide prostrates himself, which is not something he often does, prostrates himself and asks for his daughter's freedom, which is rejected. This happens like 4 or 5 times, where it's mentioned that it's happened 4 or 5 times, and every single time it's rejected. So Yoshihide is commissioned to paint a folding screen depicting the 8 Buddhist hells. Now, Yoshihide says he cannot paint anything he hasn't seen himself, so he tortures but does not kill, but he tortures his students for reference, and this happens for several chapters. The narrator then recounts a scene when he was on the night watch, when the little monkey runs up to him and starts tugging at him, seemingly asking him for help. Now, the narrator sort of again tries to gloss over what he saw and its implications here, but it appears that he stumbled onto and interrupted someone forcing themselves onto Yoshihide's daughter. 2 weeks later, Yoshihide has an audience with Lord Horikawa. He says that the painting is largely finished save for one section. He says he is unable to paint it as he cannot paint anything he hasn't himself seen, and the section he cannot complete depicts a noblewoman burning within a carriage lit on a fire. So he requests that Lord Horikawa set one of his carriages on fire. Lord Horikawa replies that he will burn a carriage for him with a woman inside. And then a few nights later, the scene is set. Yoshihide is set to watch a carriage lit on fire. Then Lord Horikawa reveals that it is Yoshihide's own daughter inside the carriage. Yoshihide jumps to his feet but is held back by Horikawa's guards. As the carriage burns, the monkey jumps into the flames to cling to its mistress. Yoshihide's expression is one of terror and sorrow, but as he watches the fire, it becomes one of joy and ecstasy. Then in the final chapter, Yoshihide finishes the painting and then hangs himself. So this is actually based on another story. So this is based on the story of Ubushi Ryoshu from Uji Shūi Monogatari. And I grabbed it from a translation of the book, but I also put a link in the description for a translation of just the story. It's like at the bottom of the references. So Uji Shūi Monogatari is a collection of tales from the 13th century. So the original story is quite short, only about a paragraph. So the story follows an Abushi, a painter of Buddhist imagery named Ryoshu, who one day finds his house on fire while his wife and children are still inside. He's asked why he's fine with it, and he proclaims happily that he'll finally be able to paint the fires of Fudomyo well. It's a blessing, honestly. A bit of a different ending here. I also put the kanji here. So Ryoshu and Yoshihide actually share the same kanji but use different readings. I looked to see if I could find a reason why Akutagawa changed the reading, but I couldn't find anything directly. Also, if you look up some translations for Bushi Ryoshu, they use the name Yoshihide instead, but I looked up on Japanese Wikipedia, and that specifically states that it's meant to be read Ryoshu there. So once again, we have the objectivity of truth as implied by the narrator. We have a clearly very biased narrator, and not just biased, but one who really specifically is trying to avoid the truth. But even reading about this story, I didn't find too much really discussed about this. Instead, Hell's Screen is commonly understood to be about artistic obsession. How far can the pursuit of art drive someone? Is art worth the cost of human life? After all, finishing the Hell Screen brings Yoshihide respect and admiration, per the narrator. Technically, it even frees his daughter from Lord Horikawa, the one thing Yoshihide desired. And then Saruda's quote that I had earlier, art does not exist for life, but life for art, is actually about Hell Screen. Life, not even necessarily one's own, exists for the pursuit of life. And for Akutagawa, who suffered being bound to what he called the family system, is this not liberation? To finally be severed from this burden, free to pursue the art as one so desires? Yet, I want to consider one of the most significant changes from the story of Ibushi Ryoshu to Hell Screen. The ending. In The Spider's Thread, Akutagawa did not make any significant changes to the plot of the original stories. The tragic events of the original basis for Rashomon and In the Grove are not averted. But this story is different. But here, Yoshihide hangs himself. He feels guilty. Thus, I think Hell's Screen can actually be read not only as a rejection of the original tale, but also of Akutagawa's own statements on family. The guilt that Yoshihide feels dominates any newfound freedom he has to pursue art. The love for his family proves stronger. After all, what is hell but the suffering of being unable to love? So, thank you. So here are my list of references. At the beginning, we just have all the different copies of Akutagawa's stories. I also have the translation for Uji Shūi Monogatari. The theses I mentioned early. Also, if you want to learn more specifically about Spider's Thread, I have the Nonaka's paper. There's another one, by Takahashi Tsutomu, The Irony of Sin, Akutagawa's Yabu no Naka, and Ambrose Bierce's The Moonlit Road. That one's very good about In the Grove. And Karen Anthony Daniels, that one is a lot about translation, but the beginning was useful for understanding. The beginning of it set a lot of good historical context about the Taisho era. So that was very useful. And then another Yasuda Anri at the end, Endeavors of Representation, Writing and Painting in Akutagawa Ryūnosuke's Literary Aesthetics, Japanese Language and Literature. That one also describes some papers that I wish I could read. That one I think has The Swamp and Dreams. I really recommend that one also, just because I really wish I could have read properly Dreams. So thank you everybody. Yes, I'm looking at the comments. Thank you everybody. I hope sort of the points I wanted to make came through by the end. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do this initially, but as I was sort of reading about Akutagawa's views on family and how that this came together, I thought that was something really worth discussing. I'm getting doggy. It's like, it's such a different approach than you normally see in these stories, particularly coming after reading things like Dream of the Red Chamber. So I really wanted to like be able to bring that context then, and then coming back around after reading like Abushi Ryoshu, and then coming back around to Hellscreen and sort of having that conclusion that this is actually, why did he change the ending? What is he trying to say here with Hellscreen? I thought I really wanted to try and make that point, and it's sort of my general feeling about Limbus, not to go too deep into it now, is that often the Limbus stories are, I feel like, are commentaries and sometimes even rejections of the original original story's themes. So I'm wondering if how they're gonna approach this, but I thought it was really worth sort of discussing all of these themes, and I hope it came through. But thank you so much, everybody. If you have more questions or want more resources or anything, please feel free to leave it in the description. I'll try and answer. As I said, I'm not an expert in in any sense. I just like reading. And I wanna share what I've learned. Thank you. And I don't normally ask this, but I would appreciate if you could like this, and if you feel like it's worth sharing. Please. Thank you, Acadia. Sorry, I don't have alerts on, but thank you. But yeah, mostly I hope that people enjoyed and maybe got something from this. I will be streaming Canto 9. Oh, hold on, I will. What's the symbolic significance of the spider? I'm actually not sure. Because originally I just found the parable of the onion, and I was like, why was it changed? Why was it changed from onion to spider? And then reading, the spider's web, seeing that the spider came originally. Actually, one thing we can talk about spider, it comes up in, oh, I can't remember if it comes up in which thesis it comes up in. One of them describes that Akutagawa, he has a trope of a certain trope he has is what the writer calls spider women, which is sort of he compares it to like seeing a spider like killing a wasp, and like bugs where like the female kills the male. But I don't know how that like all ties into it. So there is an interest in spider. He was also inspired a little bit by Carmen. Funnily enough, is that comes up. But it would I don't know exactly why it came up in the spider's thread exactly. Is there a particular translation you favor? I don't. The main one that I read, I don't know how. Will this restart? Okay. So the main one I read was the Penguin Books version on the one on the left here. And what I did really like about that was just like how comprehensive the notes were, the like postscript and everything. I mean, it is the first version I read, but like I tried comparing them a little bit, but nothing. I didn't have like any really strong feelings about one or the other. I'd really say like just get what you can find, and then because sometimes I was like looking for little pieces, and as I said, I could only find them in like little blogs, like people's hand translated things on blogs, but nothing really stuck out to me as stronger or weaker as a translation. But again, I don't speak Japanese really. I would just get what you can find. I think the right one might, when I was looking it up, might also be on archive.org. But like the Penguin Books version, because that's also what I read for Dream of the Red Chamber, it just worked for me. I guess we can go back to the title screen here. But yeah, after I finish in a moment, I will try and timestamp this so we can go back to other things. Is this inflamed in you a passion for turn of the century Japanese lit? Yeah. Well, the problem is there's always so much to read. I don't think I can act upon it. I definitely wanted to read Natsumi Soseki's works as they come up, but like he references so many works, and I wanted to understand them. I wanted to understand them to get to understand it more. I feel like the big thing was like reading Dostoevsky's work. I definitely, well, I have to read Crime and Punishment soon. Does the PNG you're using have more to it? No, it just has these two frames. I used it in some streams where it appears in some other streams, and I think I used in the Dream of the Red Chamber stream. It's only for when I don't want to use the full model. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of interpretations one can make about the use of spiders. Certainly, I think in Limbus we can see that's sort of connected to like the red string of fate, for instance. But however, I don't know what it was exactly for Akutagawa, besides some writing about like how they kill other insects. Anjay, I'm actually just finishing up, but I'll finish the stream in in just a minute, so then you can watch the whole thing over, okay? But yes, I just wanted again to thank everybody deeply, deeply for the patience with this and letting me do. Let me do this. Originally, I did want to make this a video, and I do think I could have presented things a little better if it was a video, but I just didn't have the opportunity to this time. So I know I'm not always the strongest speaker, but thank you. Thank you for putting up with me anyway. Are you thinking about diving into water margin? I wanted to, but again, just like I really did want to, but with the time frame. And then when I came into Akutagawa, originally I was just reading Hellscreen, but as I dived deeper into the works, I wanted to just keep going deeper and deeper and really understand this. So that because I really did strongly feel like there's some really interesting themes if we expand out of just Hellscreen. Thank you, Pills. Thank you. Thank you very much for the super chat. Happy holidays to you too. But as I said, I will be streaming Canto 9 as it comes out, and I hope I can continue to provide this extra context to everything based on like some of the other stories I read. I didn't get to talk about horse legs, which is still a story I don't really know what it's about. But we can see. I'll just be excited if we get into Canto 9 and there's a Tajomaru. It's about a guy with horse legs. But alright, once again, please check out Beanie's art. I really like horse legs, I'm glad. It's actually one of my... It's definitely the one that stuck in my head strongly. It's... If I can recommend another story for people to read, maybe not for Canto 9, but for understanding Akutagawa, maybe check out Horse Legs. It's also in the Penguin Books translation. So I'm just finishing up. Which I probably should so people can start over in the beginning. But once again, thank you so much for all your support with all of this. And thank you. I don't know. I'd like to do a stream or something in between sometime. Maybe before Christmas or before going into Canto 9, but it's a pretty busy time of the year, so we'll see. And I don't even really know my schedule right now. But again, please leave questions or comments. And I will see everybody again soon. I hope everybody's having a lovely holiday. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Oh, Silva, thank you. Thank you, no worries, please. Thank you for the super chat. Sorry for no animation. Thank you. Happy holidays. See everybody soon.